how long does it take to learn a second language? That was a question that was researched to a great extent quite early, actually. And Jim Cummins looked at many different studies and made the generalizations that basic interactional skills could be acquired in 2 to 3 years for children, say, who started to acquire the language at age 7 or something. Literacy, that is the acquisition of the language that is needed for schooling, for learning, for writing, for reading, for listening to monological talk, like what I'm trying to do right now, that takes much longer. So 5 to 7 years. Virginia Collier looked a little bit more in detail at this and saw that this more advanced or more demanding aspect of language knowledge, literacy, takes differently long time if you start at different ages. So if you started at age 5 to 7, it would take 3 to 8 years to reach the level where your peers who have the language as a first language are. If you start 8 to 11 years, it would be a little bit faster, and then again longer if you start at 12 to 15. And the discussion about this is that at age 8 to 11, you are cognitively more developed, so that would help you to learn the language quicker. You would be more able to see it from outside as well, in metalinguistic terms. I'll come back to that. But then again, when you are 12 to 15, your cognitive development has, of course, increased, but at that time, what you encounter and what you need to learn is much more complex than what you need to learn when you are 10. This difference between basic communicative skills and literacy has an enormous importance for practice, actually, because when the second language speaker has reached that skill, say after 2 or 3 years of contact with the second language, this learner is almost age appropriate in pronunciation. So you wouldn't notice in the accent of that child immediately that it's a second language. You could think that it's first language. Same thing with grammar. So you would feel that this child speaks as everybody else at that time. The problem is that with lexicon, where I must say also there is huge individual variation in first language speakers, of course, depending on their experiences of reading, different contexts. For second language speakers after 2 to 3 years, there is typically less than average appropriate lexicon. And there is even larger individual variation than among first language speakers. And if we talk about language comprehension, which of course has to do with the size of lexicon, among other things, there is also less than age-appropriate language comprehension. So all this means that there would be a risk that you misinterpret the ability, the linguistic ability of the child after 2 or 3 years. And you would maybe think that there is no need for further language learning support in school, that child could do as well as everybody else. I would look a little bit at vocabulary, because that is one of the areas that has been very much discussed and researched over the last few years, and which also obviously is very important and central for second language, additional language development generally. So first, if you think about first language users who are at age 6, 7, a very typical case is that their size of vocabulary is around 8,000, 10,000 words. That's a sizable vocabulary, of course. And as I said, there is a lot of individual variation, so it can vary between 5,000 and 20,000. And what maybe one doesn't think of is that the vocabulary increases enormously each year for a first language child, with 3,000 to 4,000 words per year. That doesn't mean that that is all the words that child encounters. Maybe a particular child encounters 10,000 new words per year, but learns about 3,000 to 4,000 of them. And looking a little bit at how this vocabulary develops, one can think of the fact that the child is at school and learns a lot about the world in the different subjects that the child encounters at school, and also out of school, of course, for sports, entertainment, and so on. But there are words that are used that are typical for each of those areas of experience that the child encounters. So one thing is subject matter, to learn words like magnetism, erosion, photosynthesis, and things like that. Another word is general academic words, words that you don't use in your everyday talk so much, but that are used in texts and in teaching materials, for example, comprise, considerable, phenomenon, account for, and so on. Specification, while the smaller child may know only a few words for one particular semantic field in the world, it has to do with, over time, specification of different things that are similar but that have different names. Another thing is to develop concrete versus abstract words or vocabulary, and especially the metaphorical aspect. The child would know very early what heavy means and know a heavy bag, but then to understand what a heavy decision means or a heavy heart means with a metaphorical meaning, that is something that develops much later but comes with exposure to these different uses of the same word. And then there are stylistically constrained synonyms, for example, also a kind of sizing up the semantic field and relating it to different situations of language use. So you have words like buy, shop, obtain, procure, acquire, purchase, and so on. And the final point on this slide I would like to take up is that the acquisition of vocabulary occurs in tandem with the acquisition of grammar. Because vocabulary is very central, when you learn words in conversation with speakers of the language you are learning, you also hear them in syntactic constructions. So you learn how these words are constructed in grammatical terms, in what grammatical frames they are used. And that means that acquisition of vocabulary develops partly isolated to itself, but partly also in tandem with grammar, and grammar also may develop partly separated from vocabulary, maybe. But this is an important aspect of it, that the two develops in tandem. I had another point also. I would like to say that it has been, in a lot of research over the last decades, this point has been confirmed many times. The size of vocabulary correlates highly with also L2 reading. So L1 reading, of course, but also L2 reading. To go back a little bit, there are some of these things, all of these things may be more difficult for second language learners, but some are seen to be developing very late. For example, the metaphorical use of certain lexical units, and also what I haven't put precisely here, but that has to do with the acquisition of vocabulary in tandem with grammar, is the use of collocations, use of different phrases that are common in any language.